Welcome to Let's Talk Chelsea. Daniel Childs here once again, and I wanted to do a show mainly looking at Chelsea's squad in a little bit more in depth and Enzo Maresca, tactics, the formation, the personnel, looking a little bit at Leicester, how he utilised certain players, and just looking a little bit more in depth and some of the questions that have come from that, because I think there's obviously been a lot of predicted 11s out there. I kind of did a snap predicted 11 shortly after he was announced, and a lot has changed since then. So we're not too far away now from Chelsea's pre-season getting underway in the US against Wrexham. We're going to start to see some of these ideas come to fruition. But obviously, because some players are still at the Euros, some certain key players like Cole Palmer, Marco Correa, Conor Gallagher are still at the Euros, it's very hard to kind of guess the exact team that's going to be used, especially once we get to the Man City game. I feel like the Inter Milan game is one you should have on your calendars and should be really focusing on. I'll be at that game, and we'll obviously break down on the show when that game happens, because I think that will be very fascinating by the time we get there, because you will not only have the evidence of a lot of pre-season games against some good opposition from the US, but then also that game only being a week away from the season beginning, I think we'll get a clearer look, because some players may have been sold, Chelsea may have bought some other players, and those players may take a bigger role in the first team. But there's so many names being used, and I think it's healthy to look at this season as a marathon, not a sprint. How much is going to be learned, I think, from Maresca as still a younger coach, not with a lot of experience. But then also what is going to be demanded of Chelsea this year, because one thing I keep on going back to is how Chelsea internally are viewing this season not only as a 38-game Premier League season, not only as the addition of a long Europa Conference League campaign, hopefully, where Chelsea go all the way, the FA Cup, the League Cup, but then also you add on to that the Club World Cup next summer. So Chelsea are looking at this season at max, maybe an 80-game campaign. So you need a lot of options. And we know because of the injury problems we had last year, having that depth, having that rotation is key. It really is. And it's going to be from Maresca, especially in those weeks where we do have a Thursday European game into a Sunday Premier League game, because Chelsea obviously need to be getting Champions League football this year. So I feel like just because we settle on what we deem a first 11, and I'm not saying here that I want to be in a situation where Maresca is changing his 11 every single week and we have no idea what the best 11 is. Obviously, it's a balance between appreciating the depth of squad you have and understanding, because there's a lot of games, you're going to need to rotate, you're going to need to have some backups that you can rely upon, but obviously trying to get kind of a clearer picture of the sort of Chelsea 11 we could be looking at and the sort of way certain profiles are going to be used in this squad, and maybe some complications, especially when we look at certain profiles who you kind of do want in the starting 11. But if we go off what Maresca did at Leicester, is that the best thing for those players? So I wanted to take a brief look quickly at Leicester and obviously the way Enzo Maresca used his Leicester team last year. And obviously it was the 4-1-4-1 that could look like a 4-3-3, could look like a 4-2-2. But really, I think the biggest interest to a lot of us was the way Ricardo Pereira was used as a right back. So whenever Leicester really got into possession, you'd see Pereira move into central midfield alongside Harry Winks. Winks, to kind of crudely put it in a Chelsea term, a little bit of a Jorginho role, someone who would sit a lot deeper. He was someone who saw a lot of the ball pretty consistently. But the reason Maresca, and he said this in his own words in a video with the coach's voice that I'll link below, that kind of gave a lot of depth to the way he views his team and the way he sets it up to not only obviously have a lot of the ball, but the way they build up, why they have certain players in certain positions to get, numerical superiority really, and get those overloads, which are obviously so key, especially as Maresca will be confronted with a lot of low blocks, as recent Chelsea coaches have, and trying to break those down is going to be a big challenge, I think, and it really is. And I think it in some ways that is going to be defining for whether Maresca is a success or not, because if he cannot unlock those low blocks, it will become very simple for teams to look at the way Maresca's kind of at times slow possession build up actually is quite easy to nullify. And I'm not saying this is a sole Maresca problem. We have seen this under Thomas Tuchel. We saw this a little bit under Mauricio Pochettino. We especially saw it under Maurizio Sarri. So this has been a consistent theme, and how he gets around that is obviously going to be the big question. But there are some things that maybe he can do to kind of get around that. But obviously it's trying to find ways where you can get round a press, get round those blocks in in kind of inventive ways, and moving a right back into central midfield to kind of add an extra number in central midfield is obviously a way of going around it. But you'd see these nice triangles from Leicester using not only the back three, the goalkeeper, but also the two central midfielders to really help build up and then move through the thirds and eventually get those number 8s, wingers, and of course centre forward into effect on the ball. And I think the way Nicholas Jackson or whoever plays centre forward for Maresca is going to be key to this, because you saw a lot of the times Jamie Vardy, especially, who played a lot of minutes for Leicester, would drop kind of behind the halfway line, receive the ball, turn, and then move it out wide. And he wants his wingers very, very wide. I mean, that again, this is something we're going to get back to when we start looking at Chelsea, because I do think there are some question marks over using players like that, which I understand given the shape that Maresca used for Leicester. It worked wonderfully for those players. But whether certain players, if you want to get all your kind of best talents, big names into the same 11, whether that works best for them. So the other thing I wanted to pick out here was also the way the number 8s were used for Leicester. So obviously Chelsea have now signed Dewsbury Hall, and Dewsbury Hall played a key role, not only in understanding the way Maresca wanted to play, obviously playing that possession style of football, but then also the way he'd move as a number 8 and kind of add assistance to Jamie Vardy, would get forward, get into the final third, offer a goal threat. But at times, especially when Leicester played against teams who wanted to play a higher line, you kind of see this setup where Patson Daka here playing more of a centre forward role rather than Jamie Vardy. You kind of see a situation where the centre forward would drop so deep, they'd receive the ball, and then you'd have kind of the two number 8s, especially Dewsbury Hall, playing further up, and you'd find those kind of runs in behind from your number 8s. And finding goals and productivity consistently from Chelsea midfielders has been a bugbear of Chelsea fans in recent years. So whether finally Maresca can improve on that aspect and use this to his advantage if he's seeing a centre forward drop a lot deeper is something we're going to have to pay attention to. So then I get into Chelsea, and I've kind of constructed an 11 again out of players people have predicted, some of the information we've got over preferred positions. So as you can see here, I've gone with Robert Sanchez in goal, Reece James right back, Wesley Fofana returning to the first team after his injury, Levi Colwill playing left centre back, Marco Correa at left back. Central midfield, Moises Caicedo, Conor Gallagher and Enzo Fernandez. We're going to get back to that because that's a key area, obviously. Christopher Nkunku playing on the left, Cole Palmer playing off the right, and Nicholas Jackson playing as the centre forward. Now, in a lot of ways, this is getting a lot of kind of favoured names into the starting 11. This is kind of your superstar names or names that kind of feel quite obvious, right? Moises Caicedo, Enzo Fernandez, Conor Gallagher, a trio that played a lot of football for Chelsea from Pochettino last year. Christopher Nkunku, despite not playing a lot of football, is a name people want to see. I want to see play a lot of football for Chelsea this year. Nicholas Jackson had a really good first season. Deserves another chance at being Chelsea's number 9. Cole Palmer, player of the season, extraordinary season. He has to be in this team somewhere. Reece James, if he can get past his injury problems and also suspension problems, he also is going to be someone you want to play a large number of minutes. I think we start with the goalkeeper. So Robert Sanchez obviously has already been deemed as kind of the preferred candidate for Enzo Maresca. I have deep concerns about this. I really do, because Sanchez just didn't prove capable of being a consistent and trustworthy player in that area in kind of the way he was sold. He was sold as someone who was comfortable, confident, kind of very clear and precise with the ball at his feet. He was anything but for Chelsea. My prediction still is that I think it's going to become pretty clear, unless Sanchez does a real U-turn in terms of his form and confidence and conviction on the ball and really just eliminates all errors from his game. Either Chelsea are going to go into the market for someone else, or we will see Petrovic return to the first team. I think just based on what's more likely currently, I think Petrovic will return to the first team. But then it does pose a bigger question if you really are hell-bent on having your first choice goalkeeper play such a big role in build-up, whether he will then look into the market. I mean, I think the Pep comparison years ago was replacing Joe Hart with Claudio Bravo. Bravo, despite being better on the ball with the ball at his feet than stylistically and profile-wise to Joe Hart, still had a lot of lapses in his game. And eventually, it took about a year for Pep to realise this and eventually get his first choice, which would prove to be Ederson. I do wonder if it's going to be kind of a torturous process with that of him trusting Sanchez, paying for it quite early, and either Chelsea really quickly acting on it in the transfer market, getting a stopgap. We may have to wait till next year, or Chelsea bite the bullet and try and find that keeper right now, or stick with Petrovic. So another area that I think is going to have a bit of fluctuation throughout the course of not only pre-season, but the season, especially if we're just going off the evidence of Sanchez last year. But then we get into central defence. You're going off the belief that Trevor Chalobah is going to be moving on. If Fofana returns to his best form, I think he is one of Chelsea's strongest defenders. Levi Colwill too. I think these two feel like a long-term centre-back partnership. I feel like Tosin Adarabioyo is a shrewd signing. I think will take up a lot of minutes over the course of the season. But I just think in terms of quality, I still back Levi Colwill and Wesley Fofana to get a lot of minutes. So then we get into the fullback. So the fullback is kind of obviously one of the key areas, because naturally what you would see happen is we know that Reece James could quite clearly play a right centre-back role here. You have Marco Correa moving to central midfield, and he sits alongside either Moises Caicedo or a player that I think a lot of people suspect will play a lot of minutes for Chelsea this year is Romeo Lavia. Again, people getting angry because I'm taking out certain players and not others, but just for this sake, you see Correa or whoever the left-back is moving to central midfield like Ricardo Pereira, or you see Reece James do similar here. And then you kind of get Fofana can play a wide right centre back, comes in the middle of a back three, and we know Cucurella has played left centre back too as well. And then you create kind of this box midfield. So I could see either working. I think the big question as well is the new signing that Chelsea have just announced actually with Renato Vega, who we know is a very versatile player. If I can get him up here, who could obviously play as left back. I think he's kind of being sold as a left back, but he kind of deems himself a centre back. I could see a scenario where, again, it kind of starts off as a back four, but then it's Reece James who moves into central midfield. Fofana moves over, Levi moves over, and then you have Renato Vega as a left centre back. So obviously there's a lot of variation here, and there's a lot of options that could be used. I just think it's going to be fascinating to see whether Maresca finally has actually both sides, because it kind of seemed more that Ricardo Pereira would move in central midfield, so it was kind of the right-sided player who would be deemed appropriate to move in central midfield. Actually, maybe now he has with Vega, with Cucurella. Not quite sure of Chilwell. That's a bigger question mark that we have delved on the show before, in terms of he is kind of more of a traditional fullback. Maybe at this point in his career could move into central midfield, but he does have players on both sides who could do this. I even would back Malo Gusto to do it as well. Gusto earlier in his career played in central midfield, so it's not like Gusto couldn't do that either. Again, that's going to be quite fascinating to see if both sides move into central midfield and then you move into a back three in possession, and it's kind of fluid as the game goes on, and that's maybe difficult for opponents to deal with. Or it's kind of deemed either the left side or the right side moves into central midfield. That's going to be a big question. The other big question I have, so the central midfield is obviously a big talking point too, because Conor Gallagher's future has been up in the air. But if he stays, I back him to play a lot of football for Enzo Maresca. I just think his intelligence to take on a lot of tactical information is obviously clear. I think the way he presses is so ferocious and so key in terms of the way Chelsea look to build up, look to win possession high up the field. But then also the way he covers for other players. I think there are intangible things about Conor that make him valuable for a lot of coaches. But obviously, with the very recent signing of Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, you add him into the starting 11. Where does he fit into their starting 11 as well? I think is a big question for a lot of us, because we've seen this before. Jorginho Sarri, Tuchel when he was here, obviously relied heavily on Thiago Silva, someone who he'd worked with before. We've seen it throughout Jose when he was in his early years with the likes of Ricardo Carvalho. The coach-player partnerships when moving from club to club are obvious. So I could see Dewsbury-Hall play a lot of minutes over pre-season. It's just over the course of a season, does he then become more of a squad rotational player rather than a guaranteed starter? Or because Enzo likes him so much, because he knows that player can very much fulfill his ambition, his kind of tactical instructions to kind of the letter, does he then fulfill a role? But then obviously you're then thinking for both Gallagher, for Fernandes, for Caicedo, because Caicedo comes back into the conversation here for me as well, because he's another guy that sure can play a deeper role, but then also, as we saw very late on last season, is a really good passer, is someone energetically that can press up front as well, is someone who you don't really want to stifle by just having him in front of the defence. I think maybe that limits what he can do. So again, it's so up in the air. I'm going to guess right now that I think Dewsbury-Hall will play minutes, but I do think as the course of the season goes on, I still think that Gallagher, it's so hard for me to, until we have real data, it really is a guessing game. But I do think Moises Caicedo, if I get him back up here, I think Caicedo will play a number 8 role. I really do. I think with the way he used Wilfred Ndidi was another player at Leicester who naturally for a number of years played a deeper role. But then when Maresca came in, you saw him play a number 8 and actually provided quite a few goals. I wonder if Caicedo will be one of those players too. And I guess some people, if you're thinking that Gallagher's future isn't long at Chelsea, would kind of see this midfield three. I instinctively went with this first, Lavia, Caicedo, Fernandes. And you could see that. So I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think that could be the midfield trio? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. The final thing I want to speak about here, because I think Jackson will play substantial minutes. And I think the great thing about Jackson is he is versatile. He could move left. He could move right. I think he's more likely to move left wing. We saw this before. It's really about Cole Palmer and Christopher Nkunku. Because these are two players who sure can play wide, but they are players who like to move centrally. They are players who like to get into those tight areas, play nice 1-2s. Cole Palmer likes to drift in from right to kind of central. We've seen this for England pretty recently at the Euros, and I think Nkunku is the same. It's not that they can't start off wide and move centrally, and we saw this from Leicester wingers last year. It's just, if you are kind of really obsessed with having width in this team and you're concerned about the idea that if you have Nkunku and Palmer and they start to move central because they want to get involved, they want to get creative, they want to play those 1-2s, they want to break down the opposition defence because they want to be, that's kind of their natural instincts. And we know Nkunku can run in behind, so can Palmer. But Palmer's more likely, he wants to receive the ball to feet. I'd even argue, we know Nkunku's pace, but he also likes to receive the ball to feet as well and then kind of move up the thirds here. I just ponder because then you think about Noni Madueke and Mykhailo Mudryk, especially Mudryk, who play kind of more wide touchline hugging winger roles. Again, I'm quite fascinated to see how that develops over the course of the season because then you kind of are factoring in, you want all these players involved in the same starting 11, but then with Maresca's kind of system, which is very intricate, which is very detailed, does he then get to a point where he maybe has to sacrifice certain players to then make it work? Because what you don't want a scenario, you really don't want a scenario to unfold. This is one of my concerns when I was looking at this, right? If you have a situation where you want these kind of fullbacks to move into central midfield, maybe one of them is more kind of prone to move into a back three rather than the other. So you do have maybe Reece James or Malo Gusto running down this right flank, which does provide some width. But then maybe on one side, you're concerned that you actually lack a little bit of width because you have players naturally moving inside. This is one thing I want to see develop, but I do think that both Nkunku and Palmer have to play key roles. It's just, where do you fit them in? I think Palmer, it's obviously more obvious because we got a full season of him playing on the right side of Chelsea's attack, moving into a central role, where by the end of the season, he really was playing a number kind of 10 role anyway, when we kind of move into this 3-5-2 under Pochettino, which I spoke about this a few months ago, where I feel like that in itself is kind of a natural platform for Maresca to build on, because then you looked at the way he used Leicester in possession and the way Pochettino used Chelsea in possession late on in the season. There are similarities, so it's not like you're picking up a squad that can't do that anyway. They can. It's just what players then get left out, because my natural instinct is I think the likes of Noni and Mudryk won't be playing a lot of football. I think they will play rotational roles. They will have to fight to get minutes, may play a lot actually, may start a lot of games in the Conference League and have to fight their way in because of injury, because of suspension, form, whatever it is, to get themselves more substantial Premier League minutes. Because I think with Nkunku, with Jackson, with Palmer, I feel like they're kind of, to me, the obvious first choice attackers. I think something radically has to change. Chelsea have to buy significantly in the market to change that. They have to buy another wide player that's going to really hurt that dynamic completely. Because that's, I think, for a lot of us, when we write down our first team, how can you not have Cole Palmer? How can you not have Christopher Nkunku? How can you not have Nicholas Jackson after the season he's just had? So those are the big questions, I think, facing Enzo Maresca. So again, these are just my thoughts. And again, it is messy. It's kind of guesswork. And as the preseason goes on, I think it's going to be very, very intriguing to see what players do feature. Because with Cucurella, with Gallagher, with Palmer, these players aren't going to be returning till literally the eve of the season starting. So they may only play a little bit, and that may be that Inter Milan game. But you do suspect those players will play key roles. It's then on those players currently at Cobham who are going to be travelling and playing the bulk of minutes in pre-season to impress Maresca and maybe change his mind. those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you like this kind of content, want to see more in-depth content as the season goes on, let me know your thoughts and let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for watching, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.